Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Gray, the Director of Programming for the New York Times live conversation series, Times Talks, which pairs New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest minds from the fields of film, theatre, music, art, fashion, literature, politics, and social justice. I'm so delighted and honoured to welcome you to tonight's event with the New York Times journalists who blew open two of the biggest sexual harassment cases of the past year, Twohey and Jodi Kantor, who co-authored the Harvey Weinstein investigative piece, and Emily Steele, whose story on Bill O'Reilly led to the former Fox News host's firing. These women have profoundly changed the way that sexual harassment will be dealt with in the workforce moving forward, and have shown the world that when we have the courage to speak truth to power, we have the chance to make meaningful and exacting change where it's needed most. On stage for the first part of tonight's program is Emily Steele, whose reporting earlier this year started what would end up being the first of many men to lose their jobs as a result of sexual harassment accusations and inadvertent abuse of power. Following Steele, we will welcome Jodi Kantor, Twohey, and Ashley Judd to the stage. Ashley was the first actor to go on record of her experience with Weinstein. The trio will discuss how they broke the Weinstein story, the aftermath, and what they believe will lead to lasting change. Moderating tonight's conversation is Susan Dominus, a staff writer for the New York Times and the co-author of today's breaking story, Weinstein's Complicity Machine. Please join me in giving an extra warm welcome to Susan Dominus and Emily Steele.
Hi there. I want to thank you all for coming. I also want to start by welcoming our online audience and asking them to please start submitting questions now. So welcome to you all as well. And Emily, congratulations on your reporting. And this is obviously an extremely thrilling and sometimes overwhelming and also often disturbing moment. And to a large degree, it started with Emily's reporting on Bill O'Reilly. So I wanted to start by asking you if you could tell me a little bit about how you decided to start reporting on Bill O'Reilly.
So thank you. Thank you for everybody for being here. So if you flash back, it was almost a year and a half ago now. In the summer of 2016, Gretchen Carlson was a former anchor on Fox News, and she filed this very extraordinary lawsuit against Roger Ailes, who was the founding chairman of Fox News. And the lawsuit came out. It was a huge shock. She made all of these allegations of sexual harassment against him, and within a couple of weeks, Roger Ailes had been dismissed from his job. And I worked as a media reporter. We were chasing this story. We were calling people at Fox News, and we realized that the story was a lot bigger than just Roger Ailes and just this case with Gretchen Carlson, that there was this much bigger culture that was there. And we were kind of chasing the story. And in August, we had a meeting with Dean Baquet and other top editors at the paper, and he said, I remember there was this case from 2004 with Bill O'Reilly. He was the editor of the LA Times when this all went on, and he remembered that there were recordings. He remembered that there was a lawsuit. He remembered that there was a settlement, and he said, why don't we look into that and re-report what happened with the knowledge of what we know today? So I was linked up with Mike Schmidt, who's this really great reporter from DC, and we really just started asking questions and trying to figure out what had happened, who was there, how had O'Reilly responded, how had the company responded, what did the Murdochs know? And in the course of that reporting, we found out that it wasn't just this one case from 2004, that there actually had been a number of settlements involving allegations against Bill O'Reilly over his 2 decades at the network.
And it wasn't actually your first experience reporting on Bill O'Reilly.
No.
Just a little bit about what happened.
Yeah, so I started at the New York Times in June of 2014, and I was working as a media reporter. And the next winter, there was a big story about Brian Williams and whether or not he had lied about his experience with about being on a helicopter in Iraq. And that kind of blew up into a big story, and that led to his departure. And in the aftermath of that story, Mother Jones had reported a story about Bill O'Reilly and that he had fabricated claims about his experiences war reporting. So I was doing a story about the aftermath of that story, and I called Bill O'Reilly for comment, and I called Fox News for comment. Bill O'Reilly called me back. And before he said anything, before I asked him any questions, he told me that my reporting so far had been fair, but that if I did anything that he found untoward, that he would come after me with everything that he had. And so I just kind of, I had my headset on, and I just kind of typed up what he said, and then I said, okay, now can I ask you some questions? Mm-hmm. And then we put that statement into the story, and it kind of blew up into its own story. And it was on the cover of it was on the cover of USA Today the next day.
It got tweeted quite a bit.
Yeah, it got tweeted a lot. It was a whole big thing. So what's interesting about that is that was not in any way related to our reporting about O'Reilly and sexual harassment the year and a half later. But what it did, I feel like it did help me kind of understand how it might be to be on the other end of a threatening phone call from O'Reilly, or kind of how he might respond in some situations.
Yeah, and you do see sort of a pattern of really threatening and menacing kind of behavior towards women who bring allegations in both of these big stories, the Weinstein story and the O'Reilly story. Is that
right?
Correct?
Yeah, in the original lawsuit against Bill O'Reilly in 2004, there's this whole passage where the woman's name is Andrea Macris, and she was a 32, 33-year-old reporter working for him at the time. And in the suit, she said, you've said that you've done this to other people. And he says, if anything ever comes out about this, I'll ruin their lives, basically. And he threatens them in the lawsuit.
Which seems like a very direct parallel to the kind of thing that Weinstein obviously did. Are there other parallels that you saw? We were talking about some of the investigations.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting watching kind of this wave of stories come out about all of these powerful men. Number one, the allegations against them are very similar. There's a lot of masturbating and vibrators and lots of things that you don't really like to talk about, especially with your
in the workplace.
Yeah, in the workplace. So a lot of the allegations are really similar, but then there's also a very similar pattern in how these men kind of forge these relationships with the women. And a lot of times they would make some sort of relationship through work and say, oh, I can really make you a star. I can make you have a slot on my show. I can give you a film. I can do these things. And then after that, they proceed to harass these women. And then the other big thing that is very similar is that there's a lot of systems in place that allowed these men to continue to perpetuate this harassment against women and get away with it.
Yeah. Is, some of the, in the Daily Show, the podcast that the New York Times puts out, you talk a little bit about going to meet O'Reilly, and he actually had threatened you once before, and you're finally going to confront this man on whose life you've had such a huge impact. And can you tell me a little bit about what that meeting was intended to do, and how did you feel heading towards it?
Right. So Mike Schmidt and I published this original investigation in April that unveiled that there had been 5 settlements involving harassment allegations against O'Reilly, and that those settlements totaled $13 million. A couple of weeks after that, he was ousted from his job. But in the course of that reporting, we had heard that there had been this other settlement with this woman named Lee Sweal, but we just hadn't been able to nail that information down. And so we kept asking questions, and in the months that followed, we were able to collect enough documents and evidence and research to be able to report that story. And before we reported that story, we contacted Bill O'Reilly and his lawyer for comment. So we want to make sure that the story is fair and that the story is accurate, and we really want to hear his side of the story and what he had to say. And so we sent off these questions to Bill O'Reilly's lawyer. He responded and said that his lawyer responded and said that O'Reilly wanted to meet with us. And so Mike came up from D.C. and we walked across, it was 40th Street in Manhattan to go to O'Reilly's lawyer's office. I was petrified the whole time, just because as much as I have reported about this man, and as much as I have kind of done all of this digging and investigation and talked to so many people, I'd never sat across the table from him and never discussed these issues and these allegations with him. And we needed to discuss some pretty serious things. There was a $32 million settlement. The allegations included that he had sent her pornography that included gay pornography, that there was a non-consensual sexual relationship, that he had harassed her repeatedly over a number of years. And those are hard questions to ask with anybody, kind of no matter what their demeanor is, but especially somebody who's just 6 feet tall, this very giant, giant presence.
And in the conversation that you had with him, you've said in the past that he really would not even look at you, that he mostly looked at Mike during this reporting of this event. What do you think that was about exactly?
You know, I'm sure he's very angry about what's happened. I mean, for Mr. O'Reilly, we have written a number of stories about these settlements involving allegations against him. It has led to him being ousted from his career. He has denied all of the allegations against him. He said that his fame has made him a target, that these are politically and financially motivated. It's a campaign against him, and so I can't imagine that we're his favorite people.
But I'm sure you're not. But it was more what struck with me was that he seemed to be able to look at Mike, but not at you. That there was maybe a gendered component going on in the way he was interacting with the two of you.
Right. I mean, I'm not inside of his head, so
I
don't really know. But yeah, it was very noted that during that interview, he didn't look at me, but he did look at Mike.
It's interesting. And so what do you think is different about the sort of response that the public had to a story about a conservative talk show host versus what's happening now with Harvey Weinstein?
So it's really interesting because when the O'Reilly story came out, Mike and I were so focused on making sure that all of the details were correct and that we had that story nailed that we almost hadn't really thought of what the bigger echoing effect would be of that story. And it was huge at that time in April. And there were stories every day. There were protests outside Fox News. There were huge questions about what the Murdochs knew, when they knew it, how complicit they had been in this behavior. And it kind of led to a lot of reporting over this summer about Fox News and issues there. But it's been so fascinating to see kind of once the reporting came out about Harvey Weinstein, this wasn't just an issue on the right, it was also an issue on the left. And it also was an issue where for so long, a lot of the victims had been people that most people didn't know about. So it wasn't famous people. It was kind of, it was more just regular women. And with a lot of the Weinstein reporting, you had Ashley Judd, you had Angelina Jolie, you had Gwyneth Paltrow come out, and that really did set off this Me Too moment that's led to so many other allegations against so many other very powerful men.
Yeah. When you stumbled upon this very large $32 million settlement that Bill O'Reilly had made and realized that his contract had been renegotiated shortly thereafter, what did you take away from that chronology of events?
So we didn't really stumble upon it. We had been digging and asking questions and trying to get documents. We had been working really hard to get that. But what was so extraordinary about that story was you kind of think about the timeline. So in July 2016, Gretchen Carlson files suit against Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes is ousted from Fox News. The Murdochs and 21st Century Fox say that they are committed to creating a workplace based on trust and respect at Fox News. In the months that followed, there were 2 settlements that were struck involving Bill O'Reilly that were paid for by 21st Century Fox. There was another one that they found out about that O'Reilly had struck himself from years before. And then Bill O'Reilly struck this $32 million settlement on his own. And then the following month, the company renewed his contract for $32 million. And what the company says is that they didn't know the size of that settlement. They didn't know how much money O'Reilly had paid, but they did know the allegations against him, and they did know his previous record.
And so how does that make you feel about the kind of calculations that they were making when they renewed his contract?
So I think what that story shows is how there really was a business calculation that was being made at these companies. And while they said that issues of sexual harassment would be taken very seriously and that they were committed to creating a workplace that was respectful and was a place that women would feel comfortable and safe, that at the same time they were looking and they saw that Roger Ailes had just left, Megyn Kelly had just left, Bill O'Reilly was their biggest star, and he pulled in hundreds of millions of dollars a year for them. And that was more important to them at that time.
And for you as somebody who's a young woman in the workforce, I am curious about what all of your reporting and what you're seeing all around you, like the work that you yourself has done obviously has to have an impact on sort of how you feel in the world. What are the kinds of conversations that you and your friends are having about your work?
Right. It's been a lot. Like we were talking backstage before, because I've been reporting on this for more than a year now, and it's a lot of stories, and it's very exhausting. And on one hand, it's really amazing to see so many women find their voice and not only talking about these issues, but also to see the world listening to take them seriously. But at the same time, I was talking with a friend last week after the news about Matt Lauer broke, and she said, it's really hard for women our age, where I'm 33, she's maybe like a couple of years older than me, and she said, we grew up thinking that everything had kind of been solved, had been fixed, that we would be paid the same as men, that we would be promoted the same, that there wasn't...
Oh, Emily.
There weren't any of these issues. And it's like, I know, and then now everybody's just kind of realizing, like, oh, nothing has changed as much as we were promised. And it's hard, but it's also inspiring because it's starting to change now. So.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked backstage, I said the same thing, which was when I graduated from college and entered the workforce in 1993. We thought it had all been fixed. We thought we were not going to have those problems, that everything was just going to be fine. And I feel like I talk to my women friends now, and so many of them are so surprised to find that these issues are still so intractable. But this does feel like a moment of real change. I mean, do you feel confident that these changes are going to be lasting?
I mean, we hope so, right? And I think one of the biggest changes that we've seen is, for so long we'd always heard all these statistics, right? That as many as, it's like a quarter, up to 3/4 of women face sexual harassment at work, and there's a huge number of women who are victims of sexual assault or sexual or rape or other violence. But we never actually heard those stories or the voices behind those stories, and I think it really changes when people talk about this issue. And I think you can't change anything if you're not talking about it.
Yeah, I hope you're right about that. The reporting that you've done has been so, to really crack the Bill O'Reilly story, you had to do a lot of learning on the go about how to gain the trust of the women to whom you're speaking. And so could you tell us a little bit about how you did that? Because I think that your insights have informed a lot of other people's reporting at the paper.
Right. So it was really a lot of very long phone calls. When Mike and I first started to think that this was a bigger story than just that one case from 2004, we started just calling as many people as possible who had worked at Fox News, who had appeared on his show. We pulled up the IMDb database to see who had appeared as a guest on Bill O'Reilly's show, and we just started, I call it dialing for dollars. We just started calling everybody, and we just would say, like, what experiences have you had? What do you know? What did you see? What did you hear? And there is one woman, the story that everybody loves to hear is there was this one woman named Wendy Walsh who, she actually lives in LA, and she had been a guest on O'Reilly's show for a number of weeks, and so we saw that in this database, and we decided to give her a call because she was there and then she was gone, and we're like, what happened? And so I call her, and she is a professor. She's an adjunct professor. She calls me back walking from a parking lot, and she says, hey, yeah, there was this one weird thing with O'Reilly. He he was in LA. He wanted to go to dinner. We went to dinner. During dinner, he said that he would help me become a contributor on Fox, which is a job that can pay several $100,000 a year. And then he told me he was good friends with Roger Ailes. And then after this dinner, they start walking out, and he asks her to go up to his hotel suite. She says no, and then she said that after that, she never got the contributor position, and then shortly after that, she was dismissed from Fox as a guest on Fox. And so she said, "Yeah, that happened, but I don't really want to talk about it. I don't really want to go there. I have everything else happy in my life. I don't really need to do this." And so then I hung up, and I told Mike, and we talked about it. And then he was like, "Call her back, call her back, call her back." And I was like, "Mike, I can't call her now. There's something, like, she's in a class, or she's doing yoga, or, like, there's different things happening in her life." And then he's like, "Okay, but just call her." So then I called her, and gradually she would tell me more, and she'd kind of give me more details. And then we really felt like we needed people to go on the record for our story, because we had these settlements, and the women involved in those settlements weren't able to talk. And so it just would really help to have a voice, to have a woman who was talking about their allegations. And so we really wanted to talk to her. And so I called her, and I told her I was going to be in LA, and I asked if she would see me, if she would be able to meet me for a coffee, because a lot of times, like, people will talk if they see me. And so so she said, "Oh, I'm really, really busy. I'm going to this Pilates class." And I told her, "Oh, I love Pilates. Like, where, when?" And so she told me the spot. I went, and it was a very hard Pilates class. I was, like, quivering the whole time. And then afterwards, we got coffee, and I told her, like, a little bit about our story and what we had found. And then she said, she's like, "Okay, I'll go on the record. These other women have been silenced. I haven't. It's my responsibility. I'm not doing this because I'm vindictive or I have a vendetta, but I want to make the world a better place for my daughters."
It's a great way to end. Thank you so much,
Thank
Emily.
you.
I really appreciate all the work you've done. So if you just give us a minute, we're going to bring out some other chairs, and we're also going to bring out Ashley Judd and Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming, and congratulations on today's story. So we're just going to start, I guess, by asking Ashley a question about how this all started, which was you were the first actor to go on record speaking to Jodi and Megan. And I just wanted to start by asking you how you made that decision and why you decided to come forward.
Well, I did it because it was the right thing to do. And good evening, everyone. It's delightful to be here. Thank you so much for showing up. So I have the great good fortune of being buddies with Nicholas Kristof, who is a columnist for the New York Times. We share gender equality advocacy work and sex slavery abolition work. And he contacted me on my cell phone over the summer while I was filming Berlin Station in Berlin. And he said, "A colleague of mine from the New York Times would love to be in touch." And I thought, this is about Harvey. I just knew that I knew. And I was on vacation at the time. And I said, well, I would be delighted to be back in touch in a couple of days, if that's all right. And in the meantime, because I take the New York Times seriously and my friendship with Nick is important to me, please feel free to put her in touch with someone on my team. And he went and he spoke with Jodi and came back to me and said, well, this is particularly sensitive, and we'd like to keep it just between the two of you. And even Nick didn't know what it was about. And you know, I've told this story many times before. I told it to my dad, who was in the lobby right after the incident at the Peninsula Hotel happened. I told it on set that night on Kiss the Girls when I went back to filming. I told the entire story in even more detail than was included in the New York Times and Variety magazine in 2015. And so it was very easy while not mentioning Harvey's name.
Right.
Although he was called like Schmarvey Steinstein in the comments, on the page, on the comments. And it was, Jodi really won me over with assurances of journalistic integrity, the investigative piece being very robust, the depth and the history and the integrity of the whole of the institution of the paper being behind this piece. And we worked together for about 4 months. It was a very careful process. And, ultimately my decision, I went on a run. I spent some time out in the woods. And it was again, very easy. There was a simple clarion call inside of me, like, this is the right thing to do. Whatever may happen after this, I can't do anything about that. That will be out of my hands. And I sure am glad I did.
Well, that decision was the beginning of what seems to be kind of a world of change. And the reporting continues with a story that's come out in the Times, went up online just a few hours ago. And I was wondering, Jodi, if you could just tell everybody a little bit about that story and what its intent is.
Sure. So actually, Sue is one of the co-authors of that story. And basically, even the bigger the Harvey Weinstein story got, the more victims who came forward, the more responsibility we felt to dig deeper. In a way, it would be easy to just say, Harvey Weinstein has racked up these horrible allegations. There's this portrait of a despicable predator emerging, and, gee, it's so awful that he did all of these things. But we felt like, in a way, that was too easy, because in our reporting initially over the summer, Megan and I, and then Sue and you and others joined us, what we were really able to see is that Harvey Weinstein built a complicity machine. There were a lot of people and situations and systems that enabled him. And when you look at the degree of hurt that he was able to cause to women, it was a kind of collective failure. There were lots of institutions and people involved. Some of them knew what was going on. Some of them knew only a little bit. Almost nobody realized the full extent of what was happening. Some of them knew a lot. Almost all of them, we say in the story, had incentives to look the other way. And so part of that story is saying, I think some of the questions of that story are, to what degree did various systems, ranging from politics — there's a lot of discussion of Hillary Clinton and her kind of partnership with Harvey Weinstein over the years — to Hollywood, looking at institutions like Disney and the agency system, to what degree did they enable it? How did Harvey Weinstein exploit people? We talk a lot about not only the role of executives at his company, but even the way very low-level assistants were forced to do some really, really difficult things. You can read the unpleasant details in the piece. So essentially, we felt like there was a deeper set of questions to answer that's very relevant now, I think, as we talk about the wider cultural discussion, because a very tough question for everybody is, if you hear about something going on in your workplace or your neighborhood that you think may be wrong, what do you actually do?
Yeah, that does seem like that's how this conversation is different from ones that have happened before. For example, when the Bill Cosby story broke, I think people were a little bit less interested in figuring out the systems that were in place. And Megan, I'm curious to hear you talk about some of the systems that you were looking into in this story, including the way that the media worked hand in hand, aspects of the media worked with Mr. Weinstein.
Right. Well, there was Harvey had, in this story, it was clear that, Harvey wasn't just targeting, female victims over the years. He, in a very calculated fashion, was cultivated relationships with various individuals and institutions and all, from politics to Hollywood, and also to media that he used. And, he pulled people into his patterns of behavior whether that, sort of knowingly and unknowingly. And so among other things, we looked at his relationships with various news organizations and individual journalists. And it was clear that, in many cases, he was able to, especially when you're doing, I think, entertainment coverage, that Harvey was able to kind of trade on juicy gossips. At one point, items of gossip. At one point, he was paying somebody to basically feed him juicy gossip items that he could turn over to the tabloids to either shield them from covering him and what he was doing. In other cases, he had our colleague Jim Ruttenberg was able to sort of piece together. Harvey Weinstein had a public relationship with America Media Incorporated, which is basically the parent company to the National Enquirer and a variety of other kind of tabloids. And he was able, they had a public relationship. They had a partnership to do a talk show. That was a public deal in 2015. But they appeared to also have a private relationship in which figures at that media organization had agreed to basically to dig up dirt on Harvey's accusers, women, Ashley Judd included, women who he suspected were going to come forward, not just write pieces in which they didn't name him, but ultimately go public with naming him as and so there was it's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. He was very calculated. He was very smart in creating allegiances and relationships throughout a variety of industries that he used as cover for his bad behavior.
And of course, we now know that not only was he gathering information on Ashley, but also, Jodi, you learned, as all the stories have come out, that there was, hooking around into your background or your life.
My toddler's dirty diapers, perhaps.
How did you experience that when you learned that you yourself had been sort of the target of his inquiries? Were you shocked, or was it something that at some point had occurred to you might be happening, given the extent of what you knew he was capable of doing?
I was much more worried and much more protected about our sources and the women who came forward than I was about myself. I'm a professional investigative reporter. We've dealt with various dirty tricks over the years. I'm serious about the joke about the toddler dirty diapers. Like, I live a pretty boring mom life in Park Slope. However, we were asking a lot of people to help us with this investigation. Former employees of Miramax and the Weinstein Company, people like you, Ashley, people who are, and also, by the way, a lot of female victims who nobody had ever heard of, right, and who might not have the resources or the influence that some of the more prominent people did. And so I was much more worried about them. And I think also, even though there were signs that some weird things were happening over the course of the investigation, my greatest worry, and Megan and I, we shared this worry, was our fear of failure. I think when you think about being spied on or having somebody compile a dossier on you, for some reason that didn't worry me as much as the prospect that those tactics could somehow work. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what they would have even done. Mm-hmm. But once Megan and I really understood the material that we were dealing with, once we had really spoken to a lot of people and we had heard about incidents, and by the way, some people still haven't come forward about their experiences, we've both said that on this story we felt the greatest sense of journalistic and moral responsibility than we had ever, even greater than the everyday feeling of working at the New York Times, which is already a pretty weighty feeling. The prospect that we could have failed, that we could have known this material and yet not been able to publish it and walked around for the rest of our lives holding this terrible secret and not been able to share it with anybody, that was the really scary part of the process.
Yeah, and obviously you knew it was a big story, but obviously it would have been almost impossible to predict what came out of it. I mean, this is a question for all of you. I mean, what did you think was going to, I mean, Ashley, what did, when you told your story, what did you think was going to happen, and how, as opposed to what actually has happened?
Well, first of all, I just want to follow up on someone doing opposition research on me and the tactic of intimidation. For me, it's so helpful to understand the way systems of patriarchy and predation work. And so when I know that I'm being attacked, I immediately remind myself that that is a common strategy. It's DARVO, as coined by academic psychologist Jennifer Freed. The perpetrator denies, attacks, and then reverses the victim of offender order. So I just go, oh, okay, that's DARVO. I should expect that. And, I was living in this lacuna. There was definitely a gap between this is easy, this is the right thing to do, and something really big is getting ready to happen. And I couldn't predict exactly what it was, but I knew that there was huge change afoot. And perhaps the change was going to be, oh, hey, I just got slapped with an absolutely massive libel and defamation lawsuit. Or maybe the change was going to be that all of the women who had been, girls and women who had been affected by Harvey in these damaging and obnoxious ways would come together with women across all spaces and sectors and industries and say, basta, enough is enough. And I enjoyed being in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park for 5 days, including the 5th of October, knowing that something was about to come crashing down.
Amazing.
And I had a pretty positive feeling about what was going to be. It was very peaceful.
Yeah, and obviously you were onto something there. And there has been this massive sea change, and of course there are all these stories of other, many, many men whose misdeeds are coming to light, and many, many women who are following your lead and stepping forward. And so, sometimes people might wonder why, having done this exhaustive investigation of Harvey that came out on October 5th, it was important to keep going with Harvey Weinstein and not turn your attention to the apparently many, many men who have similarly harassed and assaulted women. And I was curious, Megan, why you think that was important to keep going. As I said, we have this other story today that came out that's also quite deep.
Yeah, I think that I think it was just crucial. I think as you see more people coming out in various industries with allegations against individuals who have, abused their positions of power. It's one thing to see these people getting fired and, losing their jobs and being sort of suffering those type of consequences. But as Jodi pointed out, you really can't stop there. If you really want to get, if we sort of collectively as a society in this particular moment want to correct the problems that have allowed this type of behavior to flourish in a variety of industries, people on the left, people on the right. It's just, we had to, get back on the phone, get back, to the reporting and start to piece together exactly what are the systemic flaws that allow this to take place. And, I think that there are, certain kind of conversations that are happening, around dinner tables and, around the, the water cooler in the office. And on the one hand, there are people saying, this is a moment in time where women really need to band together and, take charge and, basically, and which I think that there's some truth to that, but that is actually kind of has always annoyed me a little bit because I think that really underestimates first of all, it's not just the responsibility of young women in office places to band together and be more outspoken. It's the responsibility of and it's in terms of women who have spoken up, who did, who were brave enough to come forward in the workplace. There's a woman in the audience tonight, Lauren O'Connor, who was one of the women in the Weinstein Company who stepped forward in 2015 and submitted a very detailed memo outlining detailing allegations of sexual harassment and other misconduct by Harvey Weinstein. And, she had gone to human resources before. Human resources are supposed to be the divisions of companies that protect employees. And, when she stepped forward and told human resources that she was afraid to travel with Harvey Weinstein, they said, well, let it get back to us when he's crossed the line physically or hurt you in some way. And, she was brave enough to then step forward again with a detailed memo. And, at which point lawyers swooped in and tried to, and she has a great quote in our story today about how, the first time she spoke up, HR said it's not our problem. The second time she spoke up, they tried to basically quietly make her go away. And so I think that her experience, anyway, I'm so glad she's here with us tonight. And I also think that her experience is really indicative, is just a glimpse into the sort of systemic flaws. What are the rules of HR? Not, what are the flaws of HR, not just at the Weinstein Company, but more broadly across all various industries? Are they genuinely protecting employees? When it comes to striking settlements with women who do step forward, just victims, men, women, who step forward with allegations. How does that work when there are lawyers for the who work for the companies who are basically helping to silence and hide the misconduct of the boss and allow the companies to claim that deniability? And so I think that in today's story we started to peel back the layers of complicity in the that surrounded and protected Harvey Weinstein. But I think that we can't just stop by sort of revealing allegations against individuals. We have to start to kind of piece together and peel back the layers of systemic failures and really push this conversation forward into solutions. Not just systemic failures, but systemic solutions that go beyond women banding together in the workplace.
I mean, there were real structural issues that allowed Harvey to keep going for as long as he did. But one of the things that we've had some interesting conversations about are the sort of psychological phenomena of how people who were incentivized to look the other way sort of explained the behavior to themselves, sort of this idea about, there were like two narratives that we've talked about, in terms of the affairs that people thought he was having, and that it was limited to that, but also just what people were kind of willing to believe was actually happening with these young actresses.
The two ideas that came up again and again and again is that a lot of sources, especially employees at Miramax and the Weinstein Company, not everybody, but many people said to themselves, oh, it's the boss's private life. I shouldn't intervene because the boss has an extramarital thing going and it's really embarrassing. And so I'm going to distance myself from it. I don't want to know anything about it. And so we now know that in many, many, many instances, they were making a kind of category error. They were placing what was happening in the context of the boss's private life, when really what they were looking at was workplace sexual harassment and assault. And then the other idea that just runs throughout this reporting, I just have to say it bluntly, it's the idea that women are slutty. Mm-hmm. Like there was this presumption that the women, and this, who knows? Like, I don't want to make a sweeping statement about, about everything that went on, but we've spoken to many, many female victims who said that other people mischaracterized what was going on with Harvey as a consensual affair when they said, in fact, it was not consensual at all. But especially, it's meaningful to have this conversation here in Hollywood tonight because, this is the origin of the casting couch, right? The idea that women are willing to do anything for a part, that actresses, that almost to become an actress, right, is to put your body on the line and to be willing to do this stuff in order to be able to work. And I hope that one of the understandings that's coming from this cultural moment is that nobody, male or female, in any kind of work situation should be subject to sexual pressure.
Because we're talking about the sort of assumptions that were being made about young actresses, basically, at this time, I have been curious about the kinds of, without revealing, without betraying any confidences, I am curious about the conversations that you and fellow actors in Hollywood have been having about all of this.
The conversations that I've been having with my fellow actors have been incredibly impressive, and the systemic solutions to which Megan referred are happening, and they are fulminating, and y'all have so much to look forward to in terms of seeing some really extraordinary leadership coming from my ranks. And As most of you know, I had the opportunity to do a graduate degree at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and I'm presently enrolled at Cal Goldman School of Public Policy, which I'm not saying to toot my own horn, but rather to complement my acting cohort. It's the #1 public policy school in the program in the country, and I'm allegedly doing a PhD there. My fellow actors are as smart as, if not smarter than, anyone I have come across in all of my global work. They are absolutely blowing this out of the water. I have been so impressed. I spent about 2.5 hours today with my agency and some other actors, and I did so much listening and left humbled because I had very little to contribute to the conversation. And it's exciting to see the leadership and the sense of banding together. I would also speak to people looking the other way and being incentivized to do so, because what comes up for me is the neurobiological wiring that we have of fight, flight, or freeze. I think when we're seeing predation, and it is about abusing power and this asymmetry of power and not about sex, we all have a fight, flight, or freeze response, and it goes to a really old place in the brainstem, and part of freezing is bargaining, denying, reordering what is happening, misinterpreting, and confusion. And that's just, with victims of assault and rape, when they're unable to piece the story back together in a logical way that prosecutors and judges and juries are willing to believe. That's the way the brain is designed to work. Those are the safety mechanisms with which we evolved, and they're valuable to us, but we have to, as a society, start talking about it. It's like with the military, we accept now that PTSD is a valid illness, and we need to expand that circle of awareness of fight, flight, or freeze to part of what happens within the patriarchy. And I think it's very helpful to do so. And it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean that it's not incumbent upon us to do better, but it's helpful to know that that's what's happening.
I know that your main concern is always going to be for your sources, and that this has been like a really brave thing for the sources to be part of. But I am curious about sort of your personal experience of doing this reporting as well, not just in the knowing that you're having sort of your dirty diapers looked into, but just the kind of the extent of realizing the depths of the structural problem. I mean, and sort of being confronted with some of this really painful material, week after week. Megan, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, I think, Jodi and I have been working on this story around the clock for months and months. Pushing the publish button on the October 5th story was like, in some ways, step one of a process that's just continued and has really consumed our lives. And but as Jodi explained, I think we do feel this really strong sense of moral gravity and responsibility. And so as difficult as this reporting is, and as heavy of a story as it is to report, it has, I think that to see it's really tough in the beginning when you're trying to, cultivate sources and get women to go on the record, and you're kind of making a pitch to them. You're saying to many times women who have felt, have already been suffered some, a violation of some kind, abuse, harassment, and in some cases have felt not only violated by the individual, but then maybe by the institution if they did actually speak out and complain in any way. I mean, you're reporting, Sue's portion of our story that ran today looked at the talent agencies that sent women to hotel rooms to meet with Harvey Weinstein year after year, even when women reported back to, she was able to document 8 agents at CAA who had been informed of menacing behavior by Harvey. And so I think that you're looking at oftentimes victims who have been have suffered violations at least once, if not twice, and then you're coming to them and saying, please, please participate in this project with us. Like we wouldn't be doing this work if we didn't think it could make a difference. And Jodi and I have often talked about this line, and we believe it, which is we can't sort of change what's happened to you, but if you work with us, if you sort of come on this investigative journalism journey with us, we might be able to prevent it from happening to other women. And but you really want to make sure that you can put your money where your mouth is, and it's a bumpy road, and it's I think that it is one that Jodi and I just take so seriously, and I think that we have. She and I have formed a close bond in working together these many months. We are we're the first person. She and I sort of text each other at like 5 o'clock in the morning when we're getting up with our babies, and we're still messaging and calling each other at midnight as we sort of process the reporting. But we also are, I think, in these many months have really come to care a lot about many of the sources that we've worked with, and it's a bumpy ride going, being part of these stories, and it's something that has been also really emotional for us, I think.
I can imagine, yeah. And Jodi, when you think about what is if you're going to try to predict the lasting change that comes of this?
All I can say is that we can see things now that we were never able to see before. I mean, did everybody in this room know that sexual harassment and assault existed? Of course. But the power of the Harvey story and the power of the stories that have come since is the pattern. I mean, Megan and I just kept saying over the summer in the initial investigation, the pattern, the pattern, the pattern, the pattern, because we were hearing stories from women from all over the place, different eras, different ages, employees, actors, and even though the severity of the allegations, there was, some difference there, it was eerie how similar the stories of predation were. And especially now that the stories have come out about all of these other male figures who it turns out were doing very similar things for all of these years, now you can really see the patterns. You can see, I'll give you, two just off the top of my head. There's a vast number of women out there who feel that their careers were cut short or curtailed or diminished in some way because of harassment or assault or rape. And this has been, I think, one of the most painful part of the revelations. There's a sense of mourning and loss over that, and years that people can never get back, and career opportunities that can never rematerialize. And that's very difficult material. But even for all that pain, there's the power of seeing that pattern, right? And we can now say a lot of women are sexually harassed when they're pretty young and they're just starting out in their careers, and that can have a really profound impact on their entire career trajectory and get to the big gender questions, right, of who has power and who controls what and who rises to the top and, et cetera, et cetera. Another is the role of these legal settlements. Megan and I have spent a lot of time in our reporting looking at the way that women are silenced. And I think there's a big debate now going on about these settlements. On the one hand, they can be effective remedies on a one-by-one basis for some women who want privacy, and they get some financial compensation, and the problem in some sense goes away, except on a collective level, it doesn't go away at all, because what we saw in the Weinstein case is that the settlements themselves were enabling, because we documented the case of a woman who got a settlement in 1990. She's like the patient zero of the Harvey Weinstein case. And in the story we published today, we documented how Harvey Weinstein said to a colleague in the office, "Oh, something terrible came over me. I'm really, really sorry about this. It will never happen again." and this was in 1990, and the settlement silenced everybody. And then, as we now know, allegedly it happened again and again and again. So when we talk about the change that can come, I think the first step to change is knowing what actually happened, right? And knowing what actually happens out there. And I think the power of this moment is that we can see so many things that we're not collectively seeing. I was walking with a beloved male colleague in the Times cafeteria a week or two ago, and he said to me, Jodi, who knew that men did these totally disgusting things to women? And I said, women did.
Well, I'm sure that everybody has a lot of questions, so we're going to bring Emily back up, and we're going to open up the room for questions. So I think what we're going to do is, all right, some of these are questions from the Facebook Live page. And the way it's going to work, I guess, is that somebody will come around with a mic, and we'll ask you to just wait for the mic to come around and keep your answers short but sweet. And your questions, rather. The answers can take longer.
Hi, thank you so much for this event and all of your reporting. So my question is, what do you think the response has been of male readership? Anecdotally, it seems to me, among women friends and colleagues, we're devouring these articles. But it seems that there is quite an interesting silence from men, and that they're not reading it, they're not taking an interest. And just yesterday, I think it was Sunday on NPR, Chris Matthews was asked about Charlie Rose, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know any of," it was just really trying to absolve themselves. And I was kind of curious if you think that's what's going on here, is that not taking responsibility for complicity and not wanting to, and that's why the reaction, perhaps, if that's what in fact you're seeing.
Hang out with different guys. That's all my friends are talking about.
I think I can just. I'm not quite sure, because we've had our heads down with the work for so many weeks and so many months. But what I can tell you is, at least in the New York Times, I mean, you're looking at 3 female reporters up on the stage, but the project was also heavily backed and by our male editors. Dean Baquet, Matt Purdy, who's one of the top editors at the paper. Our immediate editor is Rebecca Corbett, who's like an utter badass. But there were Emily had a male reporting partner. There were like very, very significant male editors who were part of our project, and I really felt like in the planning meetings that there was not. That everybody saw eye to eye, men and women alike.
And one of the things, the story that I did was Mike Schmidt and I kind of for months and months, kind of on our own, figuring this out with the support of our editors. But one of the things one narrative that I really don't like is that this is a women's issue and that only women have been reporting it and only women have been the sources for these stories. Because I can tell you the sources for my stories have been very equally men and women. And it's not just women who are victims who are talking about it. It's also men who've seen problems who are talking about it. So I think it's very mixed. And I also know among my friends, I'm 33, and among people that I've been hanging out with, it's been a huge topic of conversation, whether it's men or whether it's women. And just reading my Twitter feed or the comments on the website, I think it's not just women who are interested in the subject, it's everybody.
We have a question for Ashley from the Facebook feed. It's from Tony Scruggs. How can gender allies like me, former pro athlete, be of the most service in the Me Too movement?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I also apologize if my crack offended anybody, because, of course, my definition of feminism is that it's acquisitional. It really is a process, and that's because patriarchy is a system in which we all participate, and therefore feminism is a system that will evolve as each of us has more autonomy sexual dignity and the right to experience a full range of emotions without anyone, any social construct of gender trying to add something or take something away. When we can just really be ourselves with the full spectrum of our humanity expressed freely. And, you know, I think there was a CEO of a Fortune 500 company who called a social scientist recently who's a friend of mine and said, I mentor women and I want to make sure that I'm doing it appropriately. And that was something that, a comment that brought me a lot of joy, because it's expressing humility. It's expressing an inward gaze, like, wow, maybe I have inadvertently behaved in ways that were less than appropriate and I didn't even know of it. We all carry so much implicit bias with us. And the education around implicit bias is that I'm biased in ways in which I'm not even, in which I'm going to pick a preposition, of which I'm not even aware that I'm biased. And I think that that's one of the great things that male allies can do, and I'm a huge fan of programs like Teach Me, Show Me, Model This For Me. Ally is a verb, so A Call to Men, Mentoring Violence Prevention, and I Am Her. You know, bring them to your places of business, your organizations and institutions. It can come to classrooms and locker rooms. It can come, you know, to community centers. And I recently spent 2 hours with some Kappa Kappa Gammas at the University of Kentucky, and the first question was, given sexual assault is so prevalent on campus, what can you tell us about improving reporting mechanisms? I mean, that was the very first question. I thought they were going to ask about, you know, cute boys in Hollywood I've dated. And so I said that I would bring one of the organizations like A Call to Men or Mentoring Violence Prevention back, and we could partner with the fraternity just the way we used to partner with the Delts and have a party and do healthy communication and healthy, respectful manhood stuff together as a group. I think that there are really no end of solutions, and, you know, pay women equally for equal work. That's a great way to slash sexual misconduct in half.
Very cool. In the black turtleneck.
Hi, I was wondering when, if you can remember, what was the first rumor or allegation you heard about these Bill O'Reilly and about Weinstein, and also in your own lives, when did you first really become aware, either personally or from your friends, that harassment, either in college or in the workplace, was a real issue?
So with the O'Reilly story, it was a pretty public case in 2004. There was this one young woman who was about 33 years old. She worked as a young producer on his show, and she filed a public lawsuit against Bill O'Reilly, and it exploded into this big public case. There was a private investigator who was hired to dig up dirt about her, a PR firm that was used to shape stories to paint her as a promiscuous woman who was trying to shake him down, and then the story was settled. And so that was the big public case, and in the years that followed, there were a number of settlements involving him, but we started with that first case, and that kind of laid the groundwork for everything else.
You know, the funny thing is I can't remember the first time I heard a Harvey Weinstein rumor, and I think that's because it was strangely public. It was a little bit of an open secret. At the Oscar nominations in 2013, the comedian Seth MacFarlane made a joke. He named the 5 female nominees, and he said, "Congratulations, ladies. You no longer have to worry about being attracted to Harvey Weinstein." And, you know, that joke is significant because it was the Oscar nominations. It was the heart of the film industry, and here it was being spoken about, but it had never been documented. You know, in terms of understanding sexual harassment, I don't know how many people in the audience agree, but for me it was the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas, the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. I was born in 75, so I was in high school. I think I was just leaving high school, and I was like in that point where, you know, you're leaving. You're leaving the nest for the wider world. And I remember that being such a revelation. And I remember Anita Hill's dignity and bravery. And I think also being 17 or whatever I was, the notion, I hadn't been in the workplace, and I was young and naive and, hadn't dated much. And the notion of remember the pubic hairs on the can of soda, it made such an impression on me as a young person.
There's somebody over there.
I would mention childhood sexual abuse. I became aware because I was molested for the first time when I was 7 years old. And there is a role that childhood sexual abuse plays in perpetration amongst adults, and how it is so much about power. And something that Gloria Steinem has taught me is that men who, on the outside of the prison system, are heterosexual and often quite homophobic, sexually assault and rape less powerful men in prison. It's not about sex, it's about power. And that's certainly what I learned from a young age. And for some reason, I was a little bit nervous on my way over here. There's just an awful lot going on, as we all know. And I was checking in with myself, and I said, it's about that kid who was scared and didn't have a voice and didn't have power. And today she is really safe, and she's taken care of, and she's all tucked away inside of me or at home with a girlfriend who's looking out for her. And I have a strong, very empowered voice. And it's not about sex, it's about power. So we all need to be able to stand in our power.
Let's see, I think somebody back there in a green shirt.
Should I just start talking? Hi. My name is Mari Matsuoka, and I'm actually working with a national organization called Refuse Fascism, which is dealing with a different kind of level of predators. Hello? Oh, can I just keep going? Okay. I really appreciate
that people keep questions a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I really appreciate this question of institutional and systemic that you're raising, and I think we've known a lot. Around there's no little girls in Thai villages, and there's the trafficking and all the horror that's true about women in the world, and we've known this for a while. But this thing is so important that people are breaking this silence in this huge way. But I just wanted to ask you this. There's a election on December 12th of a man named, we all know, in Alabama. And we know that all of us actually found each other on the day after the inauguration, is when we first stepped out, because we understood there was something really, really horrible going on around the oppression of women and around Handmaid's Tale in this country. And I'm hoping that maybe you can speak to the larger, we can make some institutional changes, but we're talking about something very huge right now, when in this budget bill, they have actually made a fetus a person.
So maybe we can...
So if you could speak to sort of the question of the predators in government and the predators in the White House and the predators who are running this country.
Okay, so do we want to address that? Or should we maybe that's one we can think about a little bit more. Yeah.
Well, I think we all know. I think we all know is part of the answer.
Thanks.
I have my hand up.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I just wanted to support the fact that
wait for that.
Anita Hill did file a sexual harassment claim, okay? Filed the claim, and then the observation, the evaluation of her claim is that there was not substantial enough evidence to go forward. So I'm really old. And I wasn't 17 when I saw Anita Hill and how those politicians disregarded her and disrespected her. So it started back then, what was that, in the 90s?
91.
Uh-huh.
91, yes.
And then it just disappeared. Like sexual abuse and sexual assault disappeared. So I want to say to you, Ashley, I am so proud of you that you brought forward this whole issue of fight, freeze, or...
Fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
Yes.
Because I worked at the Rape Treatment Center for 11 years. And the fact that the psychological effects are not well understood as to why some of these women could not come forward.
Right.
They were traumatized. They have PTSD. They've never had help to give voice to their own pain and suffering. So what all of you women have done is to give voices to thousands of women who were never able to come forward. because it's been around for a very long time. I very much appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you. I think if you could get the microphone over to this gentleman over here.
Hi. Sorry, I'm a guy speaking.
Great. Welcome. We're all for it.
I just wanted to know your feelings, any of you, about the huge variety of responses to the revelations that happen. Because you've got, whether it's Brett Ratner stonewalling it, or Al Franken doing a mea culpa, or other people reacting in other ways. It just seems like you get the same kind of accusations and a massive range of possible responses that we seem to be either tolerating or not tolerating or accepting. I just wondered what your thoughts might be about that.
Well, in the case of Harvey Weinstein, there were a variety of responses that he had to our story. I think within an hour, he had released a statement in which he apologized and said that he was going to take a leave of absence to work on himself and that he wanted to grow, but also kind of compared himself to Jay-Z. Who had, as he and his wife have discussed, appears to have cheated on his wife, which one would point out is pretty different than what our story was illustrating. But was also simultaneously threatening to sue the New York Times. So I think it's interesting. Obviously, there have been a variety of responses by people since then, and Bill O'Reilly, I think, has been pretty.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting about the Bill O'Reilly case is our reporting has shown that there have been 6 known settlements involving allegations of harassment against him, and those settlements we know total $45 million. In response to those allegations in our reporting, he has denied all of the allegations against him. He said that he's never mistreated anybody during his life, that there have never been any complaints filed against him with Human Resources, and that this is a politically motivated campaign and financially motivated to bring him down. Yesterday, one of the women who received a settlement after she made harassment allegations against O'Reilly, she had reported this episode to Human Resources. It didn't involve sexual harassment, but it involved this episode where people said that he yelled at her in the newsroom, and she left with the settlement. So yesterday, she filed a lawsuit against Bill O'Reilly saying that he has breached the contract of the settlement, which required mutual confidentiality and mutual non-disparagement. And she said that he has defamed her and painted her as a liar and a politically motivated extortionist. What's really interesting about this case is it's about those non-disclosure, non-disparagement, confidentiality agreements that so long have silenced women, whereas the men have been able to keep talking. And it will be really interesting to see how this plays out, whether she will be freed from her silence, and how O'Reilly will respond. Because in a statement last night, he said, his lawyer said that he would vigorously fight this.
And this is actually an interesting segue back into the political realm for a second, which there's another lawsuit that's playing out right now, and there was a hearing in this case today. I don't know how it went, but there were a variety of women who stepped forward with allegations against Trump during the presidential race, and he called every single one of them a liar. He threatened to sue them. I was one of the reporters who worked on those stories. He threatened to sue me in the New York Times. And one of his accusers has actually filed a defamation lawsuit against him that's playing out in New York court right now. He's arguing that he can't be sued because a sitting president can't be sued in state court. But it's interesting there because she's actually relying on legal arguments that were made when President Clinton was sued for sexual harassment while he was in office, and the Supreme Court ruled that case could go forward. And so this isn't a sexual harassment case. I mean, the statute of limitations for this woman on any sort of sexual misconduct claims has passed, but she is suing him for defamation. And if that case is allowed to proceed, it could go into discovery. People could be required to give depositions, including the president himself. And so it's really significant. And in the next weeks, we're going to see, I think we're likely to get a decision in that case and whether it can proceed.
I have another question from the Facebook Live watchers. Can we please get some more reporting on non-high-profile abusers and harassers? It would help to know that they get attention too. So can we talk a little bit about that? Like, do you have a sense of what the coverage at the Times is moving towards in that way, or are there reasons really to focus on more high-profile harassers as a way of illustrating these issues?
Well, I think on the coverage we would just say stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
I think both sides are incredibly important. Megan and I have been talking about this so much. So many of the recent stories are set in these high-profile worlds of media, Hollywood, entertainment, et cetera, and it does feel like there is a lot more journalistic work to do in different places at another end of the economic spectrum, et cetera. And of course, the emphasis there is that low-income workers often have very little recourse, and if they don't, have the same level of job choice, if they don't have the same kinds of resources, it can be incredibly difficult to stand up to somebody or to have, any agency at all. The other thing that I think is worth saying, though, is that Ashley said before it's not about sex, it's about power. And I do think that part of what is important about these high-profile media and Hollywood stories is that so many of the men who have had who have a history, it turns out, of these allegations, these were our culture's storytellers. If you look at Ailes and O'Reilly and Weinstein and Halperin and Charlie Rose and Matt Lauer, they were the people who told us the story of who we are, right? They were the narrators. They held the power to shape presidential elections or our perceptions of ourselves as a country. So I would defend those stories very strongly as saying there needs to be accountability in those realms. And also, like, as newspaper reporters, we sort of get up in the morning to hold the powerful accountable. It's a big part of what we do.
Right.
And I would just speak that all to the Me Too movement and how it has created such a wonderful platform for stories of everyday sexism and everyday misconduct to be shared. And linking that with apologies, 81% of adolescent boys, when polled, didn't know what consent meant. They thought it meant try harder. So as we have improved definitions and understandings, and we gently and sometimes with great tumult make strides toward growing out of a toxic masculinity, everything all the way around will get a lot better.
Well, I hope you're right. It's been a privilege to hear everything you all have to say and to be up here with you. And thank you so much for your thoughts tonight and all the amazing work that you guys have done. It's really something. And thank you all for coming tonight.